wasn't a ship anymore. It wasn't even a derelict. It was a fossil, embedded in the floor of a great pit blown from the glacier. 20 of these skins could have stood, one atop another, and barely reached the lip of that crater. The time scale settled down on me like the weight of a world. How long for all that ice to accumulate? How many eons had the universe iterated on without me? And in all that time, 1,000,000 years perhaps, there had been no rescue. I never found myself. I wonder what that means. I wonder if I even exist anymore, anywhere but here. Back at camp, I will erase the trail. I will give them their final battle, their monster to vanquish. Let them win. Let them stop looking.
How's it going, guys?
Peter Watts is one of my all-time favorite science fiction authors. His book Blindside is an often overlooked gem. His 2013 book of short stories titled Beyond the Rift has one of the most interesting takes ever on a classic story about an alien life form discovered in Antarctica. It is just one in a long list of retellings of the same story.
If you've ever heard of HP Lovecraft, then you might know about his novella, At the Mountains of Madness. If not, then check out the podcast episode I did over on Cosmic Chronicles. It tells the story of a group of scientists on an expedition to Antarctica, where they discovered the remnants of something ancient and incomprehensible, something not originally of this earth. H.P. Lovecraft's story went on to inspire many works of science fiction, including John Campbell's Who Goes There?, a science fiction horror story about an isolated group of scientists in Antarctica who discover a buried alien spaceship. They, like in the Lovecraft story, find an alien being frozen in the ice and thawed out. That being, which is a kind of tentacled nightmare, attacks them, similar to the Lovecraft story. Who Goes There itself went on to inspire several adaptations. 1951's The Thing from Another World, directed by Christian Nyby and produced by Howard Hawks. 1982's The Thing, directed by John Carpenter. This is without a doubt the most famous adaptation of the story, and the most famous version of the story in general. And then there's 2011's The Thing, which is not a remake but is meant to act as a direct prequel to 1982's The Thing. This, in my opinion, is the least valuable adaptation. I'm sure some enjoy it though. Peter Watts' version, however, has a take on the story that is different from all the others. It takes place entirely from the perspective of the life form itself. Throughout the story, you view the world through its alien mind. You listen to its alien thoughts. It's curious how Peter Watts' story is the newest take on the story, and how it offers the most unique perspective. Stories and their interpretations are born out of the times we live in. The particular society or culture at any given time is going to affect how the same stories are presented and perceived. You can trace this story all the way back to Lovecraft, and each time it is presented, a unique element is added. This is what we will explore in this video. What does the Thing represent? What is the Thing? What is each version of this story trying to say, and how are they different from each other? Keep in mind this video will have spoilers for At the Mountains of Madness, Who Goes There by John Campbell, John Carpenter's The Thing, and The Things by Peter Watts.
In this video, we will explore how shifting societal fears like paranoia, fear of the unknown, identity, and empathy shape the themes and interpretations of stories over time.
Hi guys, it's Quinn here. If you appreciate my content, consider hitting the like button. It's the best way to get the YouTube algorithm to notice this channel. If you want to do more to support this channel, consider checking out the Patreon link in the description. Thanks guys. Part 1. Lovecraft, At the Mountains of Madness.
As I said earlier, if you want a more detailed look at the Mountains of Madness, check out the video I've already done on it. You can also check out the podcast episode I did over on the Cosmic Chronicles channel. And I highly recommend that episode because we talk about ancient astronaut theory.
Both will be linked in the description. The HP Lovecraft story At the Mountains of Madness was written in 1931, and it is probably my overall favorite HP Lovecraft story. The story involves a group of scientists and explorers who journey to Antarctica. There, a series of events unfold which have the potential to alter the course of humanity forever. The story is narrated by Dr. William Dyer, a geologist and a professor at Miskatonic University. He recounts the events in order to deter other expeditions from exploring the uncharted regions of Antarctica. Dyer and his team uncover strange fossils and ancient relics. They uncover what appear to be strange life forms frozen in ice, the Elder Things, who, spoiler alert, aren't actually dead. They also uncover a previously unknown mountain range, taller than the Himalayas. There is something odd about these mountains. They seem to bear an ominous presence. I could not help feeling that they were evil things. Mountains of madness whose farther slopes looked out over some accursed, ultimate abyss. Beyond these mountains, they discover an ancient city built by the Elder Things, an alien race that arrived on Earth millions of years ago. The city is filled with hieroglyphic murals that tell the history of the Elder Things, their conflict with other alien races, and the creation of their servants, the Shoggoths, amorphous and powerful creatures. As Dyer and his companion Danforth explore the city, they find evidence of a massacre, indicating that at some point in their history, millions of years before humans existed, Shoggoths had turned against their creators, the Elder Things. When the two explorers venture further, they encounter a living Shoggoth. Terrified, they flee the city. As they flee the city, Danforth glimpses something in the sky that drives him insane. Dyer concludes the story with a warning against further exploration, implying that the dangers and ancient horrors of the Antarctic are far too great for humanity to risk awakening. Dyer's conclusion highlights one of the main themes of this novella, which is the dangers of human curiosity and the hubris of exploring the unknown. It is absolutely necessary for the peace and safety of mankind that some of Earth's dark, dead corners and unplumbed depths be let alone, lest sleeping abnormalities wake to resurgent life, and blasphemously surviving nightmares squirm and splash out of their black layers to newer and wider conquest.
The early 20th century was a period of intense exploration, particularly to regions like the Arctic and the Antarctic.
The era's spirit of discovery is evident in Lovecraft's story. Lovecraft obviously was influenced by the Antarctic expeditions of the early 20th century, particularly the voyages of explorers like Robert Falcon Scott and Ernest Shackleton. Robert Falcon Scott specifically was a British Royal Navy officer and explorer, but he went down in history for the Antarctic expedition he led in 1911. The point of the expedition was to compete with another team of explorers to reach the South Pole. Whoever got there first would be the winner. Ultimately, the other team of explorers would end up beating Robert Falcon Scott's team by about a month, and this wasn't the end of things going wrong for Robert Falcon Scott and his team. One by one, they would all die. It was on the return journey when things started to get really bad. They encountered severe weather conditions, frostbite, exhaustion, and this is all coming after the sense of defeat that came about after having come second to the South Pole. The mental and physical toll became overwhelming. A man named Edgar Evans was the first to die, and this was likely from injuries and extreme exhaustion. He died on February 17th, 1912, exactly 1 month after they had arrived at the South Pole. Another man, Lawrence Oates, deliberately walked out of their tent into a blizzard. The last thing he said was, "I am just going outside. Maybe some time." At this point, Lawrence had pretty severe frostbite. It's thought that he sacrificed himself so that the others would have a better chance of survival. But ultimately, this would not end up being the case. The last 3 members of the expedition, Scott, Wilson, and Bowers, pressed on, but by mid-March they were trapped in their tent by a blizzard. And what makes it even more tragic is this was just 11 miles away from a supply depot. Unable to continue, the three men died in their tent. Robert Falcon Scott's last journal entry was dated March 29, 1912. I do not think that we can hope for any better things now. We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. R. Scott, for God's sake, look after our people. Considering the way that Robert Falcon Scott's expedition went, and this wasn't the only expedition to Antarctica to have casualties, it is easy to see how the harsh and alien landscape of Antarctica provides a perfect setting for Lovecraft's tale of ancient, unknowable horrors. The discovery of ancient fossils and the scientific interest in prehistoric life during Lovecraft's time, I think, played a significant role in shaping the story. The concept of ancient beings predating humanity buried beneath the ice for millennia is clearly reflecting Lovecraft's fascination with the deep history of Earth and the potential for lost civilizations. Lovecraft also drew inspiration from earlier weird fiction and adventure tales, including the works of Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote about exploration and horror in stories like the narrative of author Gordon Pym. This particular novel is noted for its vivid descriptions, exploration of fear and the unknown, and the themes of survival and human nature. Lovecraft was also influenced by the scientific romances of authors like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, who often explored unknown and speculative science. At the Mountains of Madness is a blend of scientific curiosity, existential horror, and the thrill of exploration, all set against the backdrop of an incomprehensibly vast and ancient universe. Now, without a doubt, the social and political context of the early 20th century also significantly influenced H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness and its themes. The era was marked by significant scientific advancements, geopolitical changes, and evolving social attitudes, all of which shaped Lovecraft's worldview and writing. The growing acceptance of evolutionary theory and the new fossil discoveries challenged traditional views about humanity's place in the world. Lovecraft's work was deeply influenced by these scientific developments, and this is reflected in this story in particular, as I said, specifically in its depiction of ancient non-human civilizations. The story explores the unsettling implications of a universe much older and much stranger than previously imagined, resonating with the current time's anxieties about humanity's origin and the future. And then there's the fact that we're dealing with the aftermath of World War I, which left a huge impact on global consciousness and left a sense of disillusionment and existential dread, as does pretty much every major war. Lovecraft, who lived through the war, often expressed a bleak view of humanity's potential for violence and self-destruction. In At the Mountains of Madness, the indifferent and hostile universe reflects Lovecraft's own pessimism about humanity's nature and civilization's fragility. Lovecraft's personal beliefs, including his well-known xenophobia and fear of the other, were also shaped by the eras. The 1920s and the 1930s saw increased immigration and cultural changes in the United States, leading to tensions and a rise in nativism. These attitudes definitely influenced Lovecraft's portrayal of alien entities and unknown territories as threatening and incomprehensible. Now, of course, Lovecraft has been highly criticized for his views, and I by no means excuse them. I just understand them in the context of the time he lived in. John Higman's book, Strangers in the Land: Patterns of Nativism, 1860 through 1925, essentially traces the patterns of nativist sentiment in the late 19th century and leading up to the 1920s. The early 20th century was a time of rapid change and uncertainty, with new scientific theories, political upheavals, and social transformations challenging all of the established norms. As anyone will tell you, Lovecraft's horror stems from the fear of the unknown and the unknowable. These societal anxieties about the future and the limits of human understanding were prominent at the time. And when it comes to Lovecraft's cynical outlook on exploration, in addition to the terrible outcomes of many real expeditions to exotic locations, this was influenced by the period's intellectual climate, which included a growing interest in existentialism and nihilism. Now, In my opinion, it is evident that HP Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness influenced John Campbell's Who Goes There. However, how do the stories differ thematically? What concepts are emphasized or downplayed? And how do these differences reflect the historical context in which they were written? Part 2. John Campbell's Who Goes There.
John W. Campbell's 1938 book, Who Goes There, adds elements of paranoia and isolation into the mix, exploring the horror of an alien being that can mimic any living being. And this, of course, became central to its adaptations, especially John Carpenter's 1982 film, The Thing.
It's a great narrative tool, but there is a direct reason that paranoia is a central theme in John Campbell's version of the story. Paranoia was a significant part of the US's culture and political landscape during the 1930s. Like in At the Mountains of Madness, Campbell's story follows scientists in the harsh desolation of Antarctica. They encounter an alien life form frozen within the ice. The creature in this story can become anyone, though its true nature is not of this earth. Like the entities which appear in H.P. Lovecraft's story, it is a creature of nightmares. Nothing earth ever spawned had the unutterable sublimation of devastating wrath that this thing let loose in its face when it looked around this frozen desolation 20 million years ago. Mad? It was mad clear through. Searing, blistering mad. Hell, I've had bad dreams ever since I looked at those 3 red eyes. Nightmares. Dreaming the thing thawed out and came to life. That it wasn't dead. Or even wholly unconscious all those 20 million years. But just slowed. Waiting. Waiting. You'll dream too. While that damn thing that Earth wouldn't want is dripping in the Cosmos house tonight. But unlike the Lovecraft story, the creature doesn't simply represent a general fear of the unknown or of the other, but more specific fears. In the intro to the version of Who Goes There that I found, John Campbell says this: "The basic idea is that of paranoia, fear of the other. The monster is less terrifying than the concept of your neighbor, your friend, being an alien." So, why was Campbell writing about friends who might secretly be aliens? If you look deeper into this, you discover that this sense of paranoia about neighbors and friends in the books represents a growing sentiment present in the time that the book was written.
Now, if you're willing to hear me out for a moment, we're going to do a quick lesson on the Spanish Civil War, and I promise you it is relevant.
In the late 1930s, the world saw the rise of totalitarian regimes. Fascist Italy under Benito Mussolini, the militaristic government of Japan, and obviously Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler. I think that the aggressive expansionism and ideology of these regimes created a widespread sense of fear and suspicion in America and in many other places in the world too. From 1936 to 1939, you had the Spanish Civil War, and this particular war kind of symbolizes the broader idea here, because historically speaking, it is seen as a prelude to World War II, because it highlighted the ideological struggle between different political ideologies of the time. The war represented a clash between fascism and socialism/communism. Fascism is an authoritarian and nationalistic far right-wing system of government, while socialism and communism advocate for a classless society and collective ownership. Now, the reason that the Spanish War caused so much tension was because of the involvement of major world powers. Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy supported the nationalists, who aligned with fascist ideology. They were fighting against the Republican government of Spain and wanted to overthrow it so that they could establish an authoritarian regime. Germany and Italy just wanted to expand fascism and test military tactics and equipment. On the other side, you had the Soviet Union, supporting the Republicans. Republican and nationalist in the context of the Spanish Civil War differ significantly from their modern meanings in American politics. In Spain, the Republicans were associated with left-wing politics, advocating for secularism, land reform, and workers' rights, among other progressive ideals. The nationalists, despite their name, were far-right, aiming to establish a conservative, authoritarian state. The point is that these foreign powers, Germany, the Soviet Union, fascist Italy, basically turned the Spanish Civil War into a proxy war. All of this added to the sense of fear and paranoia in America. For many Americans, the possibility of either ideology spreading was alarming, feeding into a broader fear of extremist movements.
All of this, in my opinion, relates to the sense of paranoia present in Who Goes There that really isn't present in At the Mountains of Madness.
Just as the scientists in Campbell's story are terrified of the aliens' ability to blend in and mimic human beings, Americans during the 1930s were fearful of the spread of foreign ideologies like communism and fascism. When there is an inability to distinguish friend from foe, whether it's in an Antarctic station or the global political arena, it creates a deep sense of insecurity. Historian Barry Glassner, in his book The Culture of Fear, discusses this very thing. The late 1930s were a time of profound anxiety in America, with the specter of fascism and communism looming large on the global stage. The rise of totalitarian regimes in Europe and Asia fueled fears of subversion and infiltration at home. This era saw an intensification of paranoia as Americans grappled with the possibility that these ideologies could take root within their own borders, leading to widespread suspicion and a culture of fear.
The isolated setting of the Antarctic outpost in Who Goes There mirrors the isolationist tendencies of the United States during the 1930s. In both cases, isolation exacerbates fear and mistrust.
For the characters in the story, being cut off from the outside world heightens their paranoia about who might be the alien. Similarly, America's physical distance from the conflicts in Europe did not shield it from the psychological impacts of these events, which stirred the fears of infiltration and subversion. One of the central themes in Campbell's book is the fear of losing one's identity or one's humanity to an alien force. And this, obviously everything considered, reflects the concerns in the United States about losing American values and identity in the face of growing foreign ideological influences. The story's climax, where the characters confront the terrifying reality that the alien could be anyone, echoes the escalating international tensions that led to World War II. Just as the scientists face the possibility of a catastrophic outbreak if the alien escapes, Americans fear the potential outbreak of global war. At the end of the story, the threat is overcome, however. The characters come together to identify the thing. In the end, humanity is triumphant. Ultimately, the ending is optimistic.
So how does John Carpenter handle this source material? And what is distinct about his interpretation? And of course, more importantly, how does the 1982 adaptation reflect the times in which it was created? John Carpenter's The Thing is similar to the book in many ways. In my opinion, it, however, amplifies the themes of paranoia and isolation that are present in the book, and it makes them more central to the narrative.
The movie delves deeper into the breakdown of trust among the characters as well, which helps to emphasize the idea that anyone can be the alien. And like in the book and like in the Lovecraft story, the isolated Antarctic setting heightens the sense of hopelessness. And in Campbell's book and John Carpenter's The Thing, it also makes the threat feel more immediate and personal. I also think John Carpenter's film presents a more cynical view of human nature compared to Campbell's story. Campbell's story examines the human response to the existential threat and explores, ideas of heroism and sacrifice and the use of reason and science to overcome challenges. The characters strive to work together and maintain their humanity despite the sense of paranoia. But John Carpenter's The Thing kind of highlights how fear and distrust lead to even more isolation and destructive behavior. In the movie, the characters are increasingly desperate and willing to sacrifice each other for survival. To me, The Thing asks the question, can humanity's response to such a threat be anything other than destructive? And finally, the last major difference I'll mention is that while the novel ends with the survivors identifying the threat and restoring a sense of safety, The Thing has a much more ambiguous ending, an ending that suggests that the threat may not be contained, an ending where the fate of the remaining characters is uncertain. I should make a point to mention here that John Carpenter's adaptation of The Thing is not the first adaptation of Who Goes There by John Campbell. 1951's The Thing from Another World is a film that is loosely based on the original book, where a group of scientists and military guys in the Arctic find an alien frozen in the ice. They dig it up thinking it's this huge discovery, but of course it thaws out and goes on a rampage. The alien in this movie is described as this vegetable-based life form, so it has plant-like biology, but it mostly takes the form of a humanoid creature that kind of looks like Frankenstein to me. It's extremely strong and basically wants to kill everybody. And the whole movie is about them trying to survive and figure out how to stop this thing. And there's a lot of tension between the scientists who want to study it and the military guys who want to destroy it. It's pretty creepy and intense, and it has that classic 1950s-esque feel with all the science versus brute force drama. Definitely a fun movie if you're into retro science fiction, but we won't be really focusing on this particular adaptation in this video. So,
how did the cultural and political landscape of the time influence the changes between John Carpenter's adaptation of The Thing and the original book?
What factors contributed in the shift in focus from themes of heroism and cooperation to the more cynical portrayal of human nature and the breakdown of trust? How did societal attitudes of the time shape the movie's emphasis on fear, distrust, and the ambiguity of the threat's resolution? The first thing you have to recognize in order to understand Carpenter's changes to the story is the fact that 1982 is a very different time period from 1938. By this point in history, society had already been through World War II. They had seen the horror and the devastation that a global war could bring. The early 1980s in the United States were also marked by the Cold War's heightened tensions, with an immense undercurrent of distrust and paranoia. The Watergate scandal, the Vietnam War, as we talked about in the Forever War video, and the ongoing fear of nuclear annihilation contributed to a more cynical and skeptical view of authority and of human nature. The portrayal of the crew members' suspicion towards each other resonates with the societal atmosphere of the time, where political scandals and espionage heightened public distrust in governments and in individuals. This atmosphere undoubtedly fostered a cultural fascination with stories of hidden threats and the breakdown of community bonds. Now, a lot of this is in the original book by John W. Campbell, but as I said, Carpenter's adaptation emphasizes all of this, especially where paranoia and distrust are concerned. In the 1980s, how people saw each other was beginning to change.
Society was moving towards a view where individuals were often seen as unreliable and self-serving.
The setting of the story basically serves as a microcosm for a world where communication and trust are severely strained. In an interview with Eric Vess for Ain't It Cool News in 2004, John Carpenter said this about the movie The Thing. "It's a study of paranoia. What it shows is that paranoia breaks up that human group. It breaks down society, and it destroys relationships. And that's the monster of The Thing, even though it's a physical monster in the movie." The screenwriter of The Thing, Bill Lancaster, also said similar things. In an interview in the book The Art of the Thing by J.W. Rensler, he says, "The Thing is really about paranoia and the breakdown of trust. The monster itself is a metaphor for fear and mistrust. When you can't be sure who is the human and who is the creature, that is the ultimate fear." The idea of the breakdown of social order due to the inability of anyone to trust each other was, of course, not unique in the 1980s. The 1980s saw a rise in the horror and sci-fi genres, which often explored themes of distrust and fear of the unknown and existential threats. Even before John Carpenter's The Thing, there was 1978's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which featured alien spores that replicated humans and replaced them with emotionless duplicates. It has the same themes of paranoia and the fear of a hidden invasion. There's 1988's They Live, which is about a world in which aliens have infiltrated the human race, and they live as humans and manipulate us through subliminal messages that surround us all the time. Again, those familiar themes of paranoia, conspiracy, distrust of authority figures and government. I would even argue that 1982's Blade Runner evokes some of the same themes, because a significant part of that is the blurred lines between the humans and the replicants. That sense of paranoia as to who is really a human and who's a replicant is certainly present. So, obviously, The Thing is both horror and sci-fi. The movie clearly fits well within this broader trend, utilizing body horror and the idea of an invisible internal threat to play on the fears of contamination and identity loss as well. John Carpenter's The Thing shows a shift from the optimistic, cooperative themes of the original story to a more cynical and fear-driven narrative, and this is shaped once again by the political, cultural, and technological anxieties of the time period, being the 1980s. The film's focus on paranoia and distrust and the ambiguous threats, to me, clearly mirrors the era's growing sense of insecurity and disillusionment.
More than 30 years after John Carpenter's The Thing was released, Peter Watts released his own interpretation of the story. What changed in 30 years? How does Peter Watts' interpretation mirror the time period that it was released?
Part 4. Peter Watts' The Things.
Peter Watts' short story The Things is a retelling of John Carpenter's 1982 movie from the creature's perspective.
The entire story is a reflection on the consciousness and experiences of the alien entity known as the Thing, which has the ability, of course, to assimilate and mimic other life forms. The narrative delves into the alien's perspective as it attempts to survive and adapt after crashing on Earth. Like in the movie, the Thing takes on the identities of various human characters, using their forms as a means of concealment and survival. However, it sees these identities more as placeholders because, as far as it is concerned, all biomass is interchangeable. And this is basically showing the Thing's unique nature. Its identity is fluid and collective, not individual. In the short story, you have the Thing describing its history as an explorer and a missionary, having spread across the cosmos and engaged on what it calls communion, a process of merging with and evolving other life forms. This communion allows it to assimilate knowledge and adapt, continuously perfecting itself and all those it encounters. However, its crash on Earth represents a significant setback. The impact shatters its biomass, leaving it weakened and disconnected from its greater self. The cold Antarctic environment exacerbates the struggle, forcing it to hibernate and slowly regenerate. I remember the crash, though. It killed most of this offshoot outright, but a little crawled from the wreckage. A few trillion cells, a soul too weak to keep them in check. Mutinous biomass sloughed off. Despite my most desperate attempts to hold myself together, panic-stricken little clots of meat instinctively growing whatever limbs they could remember and fleeing across the burning ice. By the time I regained control of what was left, the fires had died and the cold was closing back in. I barely managed to grow enough antifreeze to keep my cells from bursting before the ice took me. Like in the movie, it is eventually dug up by humans. As the Thing interacts with the humans, it is struck by their unique biology. Unlike it, humans are unable to change or evolve at a cellular level. The Thing observes that human brains are isolated, encapsulated in skulls, and function as distinct entities separate from their bodies. This compartmentalization is alien to the creature, which is used to a more integrated and fluid existence. It finds the concept of an individual identity tied to a single unchanging form perplexing and limiting. It wants to perfect them, but the thing's attempts to assimilate the humans are met with resistance and violence. After this occurs, the creature reflects on the nature of human fear and irrationality that it perceives in the response to its presence. I remember reawakening, too. Dull stirrings of sensation in real time, the first embers of cognition, the slow blooming warmth of awareness as my cells thawed as body and soul embraced after their long sleep. I remember the biped offshoots that surrounded me, the strange chittering sounds they made, the odd uniformity of their body plans. How ill-adapted they looked, how inefficient their morphology. Even disabled, I could see so many things to fix. So I reached out. I took communion. I tasted the flesh of the world. And the world attacked me. It attacked me. The fact that humans lack the ability to change challenges the thing's understanding of life and evolution. This inability to change renders humans distinct from the thing, as I said before, and also in its mind, tragically limited. And yet, the thing also, in a strange way, empathizes with humanity. It recognizes that their aggression towards it stems from a deep-seated discomfort with anything different or unknown. The thing contemplates its future actions. It decides that rather than confront humans directly or attempt to escape, it will remain hidden and work subtly to influence and potentially change them. The creature acknowledges the difficulty of this task because in its mind, the humans will misunderstand its intentions. Despite this, it still feels a sense of obligation or perhaps even a need to fulfill its nature as a being that fosters communion and evolution.
The story ends with the thing considering the profound loneliness of Earth's life forms, isolated not only from each other but from the greater universe, the many worlds which it had outreach to and performed communion. It resolves to find a way to integrate and perhaps improve the world, even if it involves doing that without the consent of humans.
All of this goes to show that the thing has a complex moral perspective. It has a desire for self-preservation, but also this kind of quasi-missionary zeal to bring about a greater interconnectedness and adaptability in the universe. Peter Watts' The Things is quite a strange story about identity and adaptation and the nature of life. It contrasts the thing's collective evolving existence with humanity's individual static one. It forces the reader to consider the implications of these differences and the potential for understanding and coexistence between fundamentally different life forms. The fact that this story reinterprets the original narrative by exploring the creature's thoughts and motivation allows the story to offer an entirely different perspective on the events and the characters. And like everything we've discussed in this video so far, the cultural and political context of the time the story was written in also allows us to understand the significance of its ideas and themes.
In the early 21st century, there was a growing focus on empathy and the understanding of different perspectives, often linked to increased awareness of issues like immigration, cultural diversity, and globalization.
For one, immigrant communities became more visible in media, politics, and public life, and this visibility brought attention to the challenges faced by immigrants, such as discrimination, assimilation, and in my opinion, prompted more cultural emphasis on understanding and empathy, especially in America. The Things plays into this by giving voice to the creature, which is in all other instances portrayed as monstrous and unknowable. Watts' story challenges the reader to empathize with an entity vastly different from humankind. And this is where we've come full circle, because this is vastly different from the work of Lovecraft, which suggests that we should fear and otherize the unknown. Watts' story also reflects an ongoing tradition in science fiction to explore what it means to be human by examining the alien. Star Trek did this a lot in the 90s. By giving the creature a voice, Watts forces the audience to confront the uncomfortable idea that what is alien and frightening might not inherently be evil or monstrous.
The creature in Peter Watts's The Things doesn't see itself as malevolent. In its eyes, it was on a noble mission, almost a religious pilgrimage throughout the universe. In its eyes, it was helping.
Conclusion.
Seeing how a story can evolve over time, and how at each point in history it changes based on the times, is fascinating to me. The evolution of stories over time is a fascinating phenomenon, reflecting not only changes in society but also shifting values and beliefs and technologies of different eras.
The process can be seen in various forms of storytelling, mythology, folklore, and in modern media like film and television, across genres. Different adaptations of the same story often, if not always, reflect the unique perspectives and artistic intentions of the creators. For example, Shakespeare's plays have been adapted into countless forms, each bringing a new interpretation that might highlight different aspects of the human experience.
It shows that stories are not static but are continually reinterpreted and reshaped by each generation. And in my opinion, this is a good thing, because it gives us a lens through which to understand both the past and the present.
HP Lovecraft and John W. Campbell were both known to be controversial figures. They wrote stories which existed within the context of the times that they lived in, and which reflected the experiences of their lives. Campbell was known to have offensive views on race and segregation, while Lovecraft is widely thought of as having been xenophobic.
Because their lives and beliefs color their work, it is obvious that the lives and beliefs of those that would come after them would color their work as well. This has always been the case throughout history. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe for more Quinn's Ideas.
And now the time has come for Patreon questions. If you want to support this channel on Patreon and have your question featured in a video, click the link in the description. The first question comes from Toomey. The Thing is clearly a sentient, intelligent creature. But what, if any, goal do you think it has? Does it replicate for the sake of a form of reproduction, or is it just indulging in harm for its own sake? That is an interesting question, and I know you asked this question before seeing the video, but I do think that Peter Watts's story does attempt to answer this in some form. It characterizes the Thing as a fractured part of a greater whole from outer space, a kind of entity that was spreading out, and yes, it seemed to be a form of reproduction. It was spreading out, perfecting things, spreading its being throughout the entire universe. So in that story, it thinks that it's doing something good, or at the very least, it doesn't see what it's doing as malicious. It just does what it does. You might have seen my video on Jeff Vandermeer's Area X trilogy, an excellent book series if you want a modern take on some more Lovecraftian ideas. In this series, there is some kind of entity or some kind of seemingly intelligent thing that appears to be working towards some kind of goal that is incomprehensible to human beings and that is incompatible with the way that we exist. It is not necessarily trying to cause us harm, it is just simply existing the way it exists, and the way that it exists is incompatible with us. So I think it could have been that type of thing happening as well. The reason I like the Peter Watts story is because it forces us to examine the question, like, is it purely evil? Or is it simply something that we don't understand, that we're not necessarily compatible with? I mean, you can look at it like this. A lion is not necessarily evil, but a gazelle is still prey. The next Patreon question comes from Joseph Nizolek. It seems that Antarctica is full of mystery, which is a feature in different stories. Question: if you were a leader of a team sent to Antarctica and found an alien life form, how would you react differently, or the same reaction as the teams featured in these stories? Well, thank you for asking, and this is a very hypothetical question because I'm not that adventurous. I wouldn't volunteer to lead an expedition of this nature, but if I was forced into this type of situation, I would definitely react with caution. I'd be very cautious in the face of any new discovery. I wouldn't press on about, like, we need to dig this up. I would be very much of the mindset, let's document things, let's observe things, let's not disturb anything that we shouldn't necessarily disturb. But then again, it also depends on the nature of the mission, and this is a hypothetical. So hypothetically speaking, if I was the type of person that would lead this type of mission, it depends on what the specific parameters of the mission are. Am I just going on this mission to reach a particular point and then go back? Is this a scientific mission of exploration or discovery? In which case, it would be my goal to uncover, life forms of some kind. And if I thought it was a fossil, I wouldn't necessarily have any more knowledge than any of the characters in this story, because in the Lovecraft story in particular, they dig up these artifacts assuming that these things are dead, assuming that they are fossilized. They had no way whatsoever of knowing, would somehow wake up. But hypothetically speaking, if I had all of the knowledge that I have right now in my current brain, including the wealth of knowledge about sci-fi stories and the fact that things don't typically go too well when you go digging up aliens, then, my original answer still stands. We are going to observe, we are going to document, but we aren't going to disturb. I hope that answers your question. The next question comes from Nick Gaspard. I'm curious about what his mental place was when he was writing his many works. It seems like a dark place to revisit as often as he did. Maybe he even enjoyed it. Well, I assume you're talking about HP Lovecraft. And if you look into Lovecraft's life a little bit, you do begin to see that he was a very kind of disturbed, strange man. And I actually have a book by Leslie S. Klinger called HP Lovecraft Beyond Arkham, and it takes Lovecraft stories and puts them in context. And it's very, very interesting to go through this and kind of see why these stories exist in the way that they do. And I highly recommend this specific book if you want to understand a little bit more about Lovecraft and who he was and where his mind was when he was writing some of these stories. So the last question comes from Donovan Carr. I was only 12 years old when I saw The Thing when it was released in 1982. I had wonderfully bad and disturbing dreams related to one particular theme from the movie that seems to get little attention. I am curious to know your views about this, Quinn. The victims. Their capture and assimilation by the creature looks horrifically painful and terrorizing, but this was the clincher for me. The doppelganger, for want of a better word, that remains has all the memories characteristics of the original. Does it know it's a doppelganger? Does it retain the memories of being assimilated? And when the thing becomes the dominant consciousness, what happens to the doppelganger's consciousness? These questions and scenarios haunted my nightmares for many years and still come up from time to time. What are your thoughts on this element of the thing? This is a very interesting question because assuming that the creature is assimilating the memories from what we know about consciousness and what makes a conscious being, they should be assimilating a version of that distinct consciousness. But it's not beyond the realm of possibility that the thing's biology somehow augments this consciousness to be accepting of the thing's presence. We have to assume that this is a being that has gone through millions of years of evolution to get to the place where it is now, where it can assimilate life forms in this nature. It certainly would have to develop a mechanism by which to suppress a conscious life form's original idea of self. Now, as to what this process feels like to the other conscious part of that mind, that is up in the air. Like you said, the physical process does appear to be very painful, so it might be proper to assume that the mental process is also somewhat painful. So in a sense, the thing itself in its birth might be suffering mentally because it's suppressing a part of like itself. In its rebirth, in the process of taking the form of whatever life form it is assimilating. But it also makes sense that the thing, like I said, would have evolved some way of limiting the pain that it actually experienced in doing so. This is a very interesting question, and thanks again for asking. All right, that's it for Patreon questions this time, guys. Thanks so much. Make sure you like and subscribe for more Quinn's ideas.